Welcome to the deep dive. We are really excited today. We're tearing into some source material provided by you, our listener.
Yeah, this is great stuff.
Specifically, we're doing a depth dive into key insights from Ed Catmull's fantastic book, Creativity, Inc.
A classic, really.
Our mission today, to unpack the core lessons Catmull shares about building, and just as importantly, sustaining a truly creative culture. We'll be drawing heavily on the incredible journey of Pixar.
And it was definitely a journey, sometimes pretty tumultuous.
Right.
And, while Pixar means animation to most people, the principles we're looking at today, they're universal.
Absolutely.
It's all about nurturing collaboration, navigating growth, dealing with change, and fostering constant invention. Things that apply to any team, really, any organization facing creative challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to look at those foundational ideas that defined Pixar and, crucially, how they got tested, sometimes right to the limit.
And prepare yourself, because some of these takeaways are seriously counterintuitive.
Okay.
Like the idea that failure isn't just, necessary, but actively good.
Right. That blows some minds.
Or that maybe ideas aren't king, after all. That maybe people are the single most valuable asset, which sounds obvious, but maybe isn't practiced.
Exactly. It's how they learn these lessons. It's so fascinating. Okay, let's dive in.
So where do we begin? Ed Catmull's story starts pretty early, right? With this fascination for computers and animation.
Yeah, he grew up in the mid-50s, early 60s. Describes it as this really optimistic time. Technology could solve anything.
But then something shifted.
Right, 1957, Sputnik Hughes-12. Suddenly it wasn't America's ahead. The Soviet Union had launched a satellite.
Wow.
So you have this blend of boundless optimism mixed with this sudden jolt of fear and competition that really shaped his drive.
And led him to the University of Utah.
Exactly, which was, thanks to Professor Ivan Sutherland, just this unique hotbed for computer graphics research. Sutherland was a visionary. He actually believed Hollywood would eventually care about this stuff.
Way ahead of his time.
Totally. And the department encouraged autonomy. Different thinkers pursuing their own paths. Catmull did groundbreaking work there, like the digital hand animation.
Oh, yeah, I remember seeing that. It was in that movie.
Future World, 1976, yeah. So early days, but really foundational.
Okay, so from academia, where did they go next? NYIT.
Right, the New York Institute of Technology. They got financial backing there, which was huge. They could buy equipment, hire talent.
But they were missing something.
Filmmaking experience.
Yeah.
They knew the tech, but not the storytelling craft. So they started looking for Hollywood partners.
And Hollywood was like, computers? No thanks.
Pretty much initially. High-tech wasn't seen as a filmmaking tool. But then Star Wars happened.
George Lucas.
George Lucas was interested.
Yeah.
That led Catmull to Lucasfilm, starting their computer division. Big step up.
And that meant changing how he managed things.
Yeah, he realized his grad school style,
Mm-hmm.
very flat, hands-off, wasn't going to scale. He consciously decided, okay, we need managers, we need some hierarchy for growth, even though instinctively he was kind of suspicious of it.
Interesting. And was it smooth sailing inside Lucasfilm?
Not entirely. The visual effects guys were mostly indifferent, but the film editors, they were actively hostile to the video editing system they were developing.
Really? Even though Lucas wanted it?
Yep. They saw it as like an assault on their craft, their identity. It's a classic early example of that human resistance to change, even when the tech seems better on paper.
Fascinating. And this is when John Lasseter enters the picture.
The perfect time. John came from the heart of Disney animation tradition, CalArts. Trained by the legends, he was the dreamer, a storyteller first and foremost.
So art meets science.
Exactly. Bringing that narrative sensibility into this super technical group was, well, transformative. And it's kind of cool. His student film, The Lady in the Lamp, that little lamp, became Luxo Jr., the Pixar logo.
No way. The seeds were right there. Okay, so they jump into making their own short.
The Adventures of Andre and Wally B. For the big SIGGRAPH conference in '84, Catmull describes it as just intense, chaotic.
Because they were inventing as they went.
Totally. Not just making a film, but inventing the whole computer animation pipeline, basically from scratch, under this crazy deadline pressure.
Wow. And meanwhile, they're also trying to be a business, right? Selling software.
Yeah, which brought its own learning curve. There's a great story about pricing their early software. They got advice from experienced business folks.
Standard advice, probably.
Seemed like it. Start high. Easier to lower prices than raise them. Makes sense, right?
Sure.
But Catmull realized this simple answer, this kind of handle, stopped them asking the real complex questions.
Like what?
Like, how do we really understand what customers expect? How do we price this so we can reinvest and actually make it better over time? He learned that simple answers can distract you from the messy reality, the suitcase of the problem.
That's a great analogy. Suitcase and handle. Okay, fast forward a bit. The stakes get much higher with Toy Story.
Oh, massively. Their first feature film. This was a 5-year fight.
A fight against
Well,
Disney.
pushing back against early suggestions like making it a musical, and they had to completely scrap and reboot the story multiple times because it just wasn't working.
Which led to the infamous Black Friday.
November 19th, 1993.
Yeah.
They'd been getting these notes from Disney execs. More edge, make it funnier for adults.
Uh-oh.
And in trying to respond, Woody had become this aggressively mean, unlikable character in the story reels they showed.
So Disney pulled the plug.
Yep. Halted production. And honestly, they were right to. The film was collapsing.
That must have been terrifying.
Absolutely. So the core team, John Lasseter, Andrew Stanton, P. Dr. Joe Ranfaft, they basically went into lockdown for months
To fix it.
to rediscover it. Why do they want to make this film? They had to get back to the heart of the original idea and, crucially, learn to trust their own collective instincts about story. It was a massive learning moment, born from total crisis.
And obviously, Toy Story became a huge success.
Phenomenal. Critically, financially, changed everything.
But for Catmull, not quite a happy ending yet.
That's the surprising part. He describes this unexpected, hollow, lost feeling. He chased this goal, the first computer-animated feature, for 20 years. And then he achieved it.
And felt empty.
Yeah. Like, now what? Just running a company wasn't enough. That feeling kind of pushed him to find a new mission, a new challenge beyond just making the next movie.
Okay, so what was that new mission? Where did he look?
He started looking around Silicon Valley, actually. Seeing these successful companies full of smart people, that would suddenly just collapse, go off the rails.
Right, that happened.
And he suspected it wasn't just bad luck or competition. He thought maybe it was internal stuff. Destructive forces that leaders weren't seeing because they were too focused outward.
Looking at the competition instead of inward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this connected directly to his own experience post-Toy Story. He thought he was paying attention. Open door policy.
Yeah, the standard management thing.
Right. But he realized he'd been totally blind to this serious, ongoing rift between the creative teams and the production department.
He didn't know about it.
Completely missed it. Only found out when staffing A Bug's Life. Found all this deep resentment from production managers who felt totally disrespected, marginalized.
Wow. How did he miss that if his door was open?
That's what baffled him. But when he dug in, he found the suitcase. Many of those production managers came from the Hollywood freelance world.
Ah, project to project.
Exactly. So they assumed their Pixar jobs were temporary too, just for one film. And they figured complaining or speaking up would mean they wouldn't get hired for the next one.
So they just suffered in silence.
Pretty much. Only when they were asked to stay on permanently after Toy Story did the floodgates open, and they felt safe enough to talk about how bad things had been.
That's a huge blind spot.
And it led to this critical insight for Catmull, which became his new driving purpose. Being on the lookout for problems was not the same as seeing problems.
So passive availability isn't enough. You have to actively look.
Precisely. His mission became, how do we build a sustainable creative culture by actively finding and addressing these hidden, unseen problems before they fester and blow up?
So what was the first step? Just talk to people.
Basically, yeah, but not in a formal, like, tell me what's wrong way.
Yeah.
More open-ended conversations, trying to understand their perspectives, how they saw things, how the rift developed.
And what did they learn from that?
A key mistake they'd made was confusing the communication structure with the organizational hierarchy.
Meaning?
Well, you need a chain of command for decisions, right? But for creative work, an animator absolutely needs to talk directly to a modeler or a TD or a production manager without having to go up the chain and back down again.
It's too slow, too bureaucratic.
Exactly. It kills efficiency and collaboration. So they made it a company principle. Anyone should be able to talk to anyone at any level, anytime, without fear.
Get rid of the proper channels for communication.
For communication, yes. Not for decision-making authority, but for sharing information and solving problems quickly. Prioritize direct, honest talk. It was understood to be more efficient for their kind of work in the long run.
Okay, so surviving Toy Story, reflecting on those hidden problems, this started to shape some core Pixar principles, right?
Absolutely crystallized them. Two huge ones emerge. Story is king and trust the process.
Story is king. Seems straightforward.
Yet it is, but it's about ruthless focus. Nothing, not the cool tech, not merchandising potential, nothing gets in the way of making the story work.
The goal wasn't just technical dazzle.
No. The goal was for people leaving the theater to talk about the characters, the feelings, the story itself. They believed that focus was why Toy Story connected, why it wasn't just a 9-day wonder of computer graphics.
Makes sense. What about trust the process? That sounds potentially problematic.
Huh. Yeah, it does. And it absolutely faced its biggest test during Toy Story 2.
Which was supposed to be just a direct-to-video thing initially.
Right, lower budget. But they fought to make it theatrical, arguing it deserved that quality.
Yeah.
But then, like, a year into production, the reels just weren't good.
Uh-oh. Deja vu.
A bit. And the directors kept asking for John time, needing John Lasseter's direct input, which was a sign they weren't trusting the process they were supposed to be leading.
So what happened?
The turning point was Andrew Stanton showing these weak reels to Disney execs. And Disney was basically like, look, it's good enough for a sequel. We don't have time for a redo.
But Pixar pushed back.
Andrew, representing the leadership, said basically, no, we pushed for theatrical. We hold ourselves to that standard. We're going to redo it.
Wow, that takes guts. And budget.
Immense guts. And it led to the incredibly tough decision to replace the original directors and have John Lasseter step in to lead a massive reboarding effort.
That must have been brutal for everyone.
Horrible. But it was this visceral demonstration. We are committed to excellence. We live by these principles, even when it's incredibly painful and costly. Trust the process sometimes means having the courage to say, this process isn't working, and changing it.
Surviving crises like that must forge some deep insights.
Absolutely. And it led Catmull to one of his most fundamental, maybe most counterintuitive conclusions.
Which is?
Getting the right people and the right chemistry is more important than getting the right idea.
People over ideas. That feels radical almost.
Right. He actually polled audiences on this for years, and it always split roughly 50-50, which told him people were just guessing. He argues the answer should be obvious.
Why?
Because ideas don't just appear fully formed. Ideas come from people. Therefore, people are inherently more important than any single starting idea.
We tend to glorify the aha moment, the single big idea.
Exactly. But Catmull points out a film or any complex creative project isn't one idea. It's tens of thousands of ideas, big and small. Tens of thousands of decisions made by dozens, hundreds of people.
The initial concept is just a seed.
Just a seed. It's the people who nurture it, shape it, solve the endless problems, make the thousands of micro choices that turn that seed into something great.
That perspective also relates to managing the team, right? Ambition versus well-being.
Definitely. Pixar attracts ambitious people, driven people. And the leadership always wants the next film to be better. That creates this powerful, positive force.
But it could turn negative, like burnout.
Easily, if it's not managed carefully. Crunch times might be unavoidable near deadlines, but leaders have to guide that energy, not just exploit it. Supporting people isn't just saying find balance.
It's making balance possible.
Right. Things like on-site amenities help, sure, but it's also being mindful of subtle pressures. Like, are you implicitly comparing the output of a young single person working crazy hours to a parent juggling family responsibilities? Investing in well-being isn't being soft. It's crucial for sustainable creativity and, frankly, productivity.
And this loops back to that suitcase handle idea you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Taking something complex, like the methy reality of the creative process, and boiling it down to a simple phrase like, trust the process.
The phrase becomes the handle.
Right. Easy to grab, easy to repeat, but you risk leaving the suitcase. The struggle, the nuance, the actual meaning learned through hard experience behind. Whereas like quality, excellence, they can become empty handles too if you're not careful.
So the challenge is staying connected to the suitcase, remembering the why and the how behind the slogan.
Precisely. It takes conscious effort. Directors like Brad Bird get this. He says, the process either makes you or unmakes you. It's not passive. You engage with it.
And Catherine Serafian, the producer.
Yeah, she prefers saying she triggers the process rather than just trusting it. It implies active involvement, observation, readiness to intervene if it's going wrong. It's about keeping that suitcase packed and carrying it with you.
Okay, so if principles and phrases can become these empty handles, how do you build systems to keep things real? To ensure candor, challenge assumptions, fight mediocrity?
That's where mechanisms come in. And one of Pixar's most famous is the Braintrust.
Right. Tell us about the Braintrust. What's the core idea?
Simple premise.
Yeah.
Get your smartest, most passionate people in a room, show them the film in progress, and get their completely candid feedback on what's not working.
Candor is key.
Absolutely essential. Catmull argues it's the bedrock of trust, and trust is the bedrock of collaboration. But, and this is crucial, candor isn't easy or natural.
Fear gets in the way.
Always. Fear of looking dumb, fear of offending someone powerful, fear of payback. These fears are always there, and you have to actively, constantly fight against them to make candor possible.
So how does a Braintrust session actually work? Walk us through it.
Okay, so the director and their team screen their reels. These are really rough versions, like storyboards cut together with temp voices and music.
Yeah, very early stage.
Very early, very rough. The Braintrust watches, and then they discuss. The focus is only on identifying problems. What's confusing? Where does the story lag? What feels emotionally false? What's not landing?
But they don't offer solutions.
That's the critical rule. No prescribing solutions. Their job is to diagnose, not to operate. They help the director see the problems clearly, from multiple perspectives.
And then it's up to the director to figure out the fix.
Exactly. The director takes all that feedback, goes away, digests it, and decides how to address the problems. This keeps ownership firmly with the director. Then, a few months later, they come back with a new version, and the process repeats.
Why is not prescribing solutions so important? Wouldn't it be faster if these smart people just said, do this?
May be seemingly faster in the short term, but it undermines ownership and often leads to less original solutions. When the director has to internalize the problem and find their own way to fix it, the solution is usually more organic, more integrated, and ultimately better for their film.
And this is different from standard studio notes.
Fundamentally different. Studio notes often come from executives, maybe with different agendas, commercial versus artistic. There can be inherent tension. The Braintrust is made up of peers, fellow directors, writers, heads of story people who've been in the director's chair, who understand the struggle intimately. Their notes come from a place of shared experience and are aimed solely at making the film better. That builds trust.
The book has some amazing examples where one Braintrust note just unlocked everything.
Oh, yeah. Like on Wall-E. They were stuck on the ending. Originally, Wall-E saves Eve.
Yeah.
Romantic, but
Something was off.
Brad Bird in the Braintrust pointed it out. He said something like, you're denying the audience the moment they've been waiting for, where Evie finally throws away her programming and goes all out to save Wall-E.
And that sparked the change.
Totally flipped it. Led directly to that incredibly moving, perfect ending we have now.
Wow. Another one. Toy Story 3.
Right. The original script had the toys turning against Lotso because Woody gives this big speech Andrew Stanton called bullshit, basically.
Didn't feel real.
No. He said these toys aren't dumb. They followed Lotso because he was powerful, intimidating. He used this analogy. Lotso is Stalin, Big Baby is his army. His note was, if you flip the army, you can get rid of Stalin.
So change Big Baby's allegiance.
Exactly. Show Big Baby the truth about Lotso, flip his loyalty, and that's what brings Lotso down. Much more believable, much more character-driven.
And Pete Docter on Monsters? Inc. He struggled early on.
Yeah, the Braintrust process helped him iterate. The main kid character changed from Mary to Boo. Mike Wazowski was added later. But he held on to that core concept, monsters who scare kids for a living. The Braintrust helped him keep refining, pushing, until he found that powerful, emotional core with Sully and Boo's goodbye.
What's striking is the nature of that feedback. It sounds intense but constructive.
It is intense. Passionate debates happen. But the passion is directed at the film, at solving the problems for the project. It's not about winning an argument or proving you're the smartest person in the room. It's additive. How can we help the director see this more clearly? That shared focus builds incredible trust.
Okay, so the Braintrust fosters candor about the work. But what about the individual fear of just failing, making mistakes, especially when you're trying something new?
Huge hurdle.
Yeah.
And this is where Andrew Stanton's philosophy comes in, which Catmull highlights. Be wrong as fast as you can.
Be wrong fast. Sounds counterintuitive again.
It is. But the idea is to reframe failure. It's not a judgment on your worth. It's a necessary manifestation of exploration, of learning. If you're never wrong, you're probably not pushing boundaries.
You're playing it safe.
Exactly. Trying to outthink failure, overplan everything to avoid mistakes. It's often counterproductive. It leads to cautious, derivative work. And psychologically, moving quickly, even if you hit dead ends, feels like progress. Keeps momentum going.
But failure costs money. Making a bad movie is expensive. How do they square that?
That's the crucial balance. They try to make the iteration and exploration less expensive. They front load the risk, spend the time and effort, which is still significant, but less than full production in that early development phase. Making those cheap reels, finding the problems there, failing there repeatedly before committing the massive resources needed for final animation.
So fail often, but fail cheap, ideally.
That's the goal. But sometimes big failures still happen later, like the blue-footed newts project Catmull mentions, which totally imploded.
Right. What happens then? Blame game.
The temptation is there, sure, but Catmull stresses the importance, after a catastrophe like that, of looking inward. Analyze the assumptions, the process. Why did this go wrong? Don't just point fingers. What can we learn from this, however painful?
He talks about how the leadership responded after some of those focusing on what they, as leaders, had missed. Maybe inadequate mentoring for a new director or insufficient preparation.
Right, taking ownership of the systemic issues, not just blaming the individual who was steering the ship when it hit the iceberg.
And that builds trust.
That's the core argument. Trust isn't about believing people are perfect and will never screw up. It's built by trusting them, even when they do. It's demonstrated by how leaders react to mistakes and failures.
So management's job isn't to prevent all risks.
No, that would kill creativity.
Yeah.
Their job is to build the capacity to recover from mistakes and, critically, to make it feel safe for people to take the necessary creative risks in the first place.
It's fascinating that they reached a point where they actually got worried if a film wasn't having problems early on.
Yeah, problems and uncertainty became signs that they were actually inventing something, pushing into new territory, not just repeating a formula. That discomfort was a signal they were onto something potentially original.
Creativity requires going into the unknown.
Exactly. And the unknown is inherently uncomfortable. The skill is finding that sweet spot, enough known structure to navigate, but enough unknown to allow for discovery and learning to tolerate that discomfort without panicking.
Different directors have different metaphors for that.
Yeah, Pete Docter talks about running through a dark tunnel, trusting there's an end. Brad Bird compares it to skiing tense up. You fall, commit, and flow. You stay upright. It's about moving forward, learning, and correcting.
So, as a company like Pixar grows, becomes successful, establishes ways of doing things, a new danger emerges, right? Protecting the new stuff.
Yes, the fragile, awkward, unproven ideas. Catmull calls the force that threatens them the beast.
The beast. Sounds ominous.
It represents the established ways of doing things, the momentum of the ongoing operation. Often championed by very competent, organized people focused on efficiency, schedules, budgets, all necessary things.
But the beast can crush new ideas.
If there isn't a conscious effort to protect them, yes. The beast thrives on predictability and efficiency. New ideas are inherently unpredictable and often inefficient at first, so you need to actively tame the beast.
Finding a balance.
Exactly. Balancing the needs of the operational side of the beast with the needs of the exploratory creative side.
He uses the example of all the different departments in animation.
Right. Story, art, modeling, layout, budget, marketing.
Yeah.
They all have valid priorities, but they often conflict. If one agenda dominates, like, say, marketing always insisting on copying the last hit because it feels safer, creativity suffers, the beast wins.
So protecting the new requires deliberate action. How does that apply to feedback?
It means being careful how you give feedback on those early fragile ideas. The goal should be to nurture, to help it grow, not to performatively kill it, just to show off your high standards.
It's easier to criticize than to support something unproven.
Much easier. Catmull argues that endorsing something uncertain, giving it space and resources to develop, is often the braver, more valuable act than delivering sharp, negative feedback.
It's like that caterpillar cocoon analogy he uses.
Yeah, the new idea is the caterpillar. It needs protection of the cocoon to transform. The system, the beast, naturally favors the established butterfly, not the vulnerable caterpillar. Protecting the new is an ongoing, conscious fight against that inherent bias.
Another point Catmull makes is about our own limited perspectives. We think we see everything, but we don't.
Right. Our personal experiences, our mental models of how things work, they filter everything. We miss stuff. We misunderstand each other.
Which can cause problems in a collaborative environment.
Huge problems. But the goal isn't to make everyone think the same. It's to recognize that these different perspectives, these different models, can actually be assets if you create ways to surface them and learn from them.
And Pixar develops specific ways to do that, like dailies.
Dailies are huge. They're not just check-ins. They're these intensive sessions where animators show their work, shot by shot, and get detailed critiques from the director and peers.
A learning environment.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
It's a masterclass in seeing details, understanding performance, thinking more critically about the work. You learn from the feedback on your own shots and from the discussion about everyone else's. It forces you to broaden your view.
And research trips. Those aren't just fun excursions.
Definitely not. They're about challenging assumptions, getting out of the building, seeing the real thing. It keeps cliches away, fuels genuine inspiration.
Like for Ratatouille.
Perfect example. They spend serious time in real Parisian kitchens. That level of authentic detail, how chefs move, the equipment, the atmosphere, it grounds the fantasy. Even if the audience doesn't know why it feels real, they feel the authenticity. It makes the story stronger.
Okay, so all these cultural elements, these processes, they faced the ultimate stress test with the Disney acquisition in 2006.
Oh yeah, huge moment. Massive uncertainty, real fear among Pixar employees. Would their unique culture just get swallowed up by the giant?
But Catmull and Lasseter took roles at Disney Animation too.
Right. The deal involved them taking leadership roles to help revitalize Disney animation while also taking specific contractual steps to protect Pixar's operational independence and culture.
So they were managing two different cultures simultaneously.
Exactly. Pixar, the sort of rebellious pioneers, and Disney Animation with this incredible legacy, but at the time struggling to live up to it, really wanting to make films worthy of Walt again.
How did they bridge that gap? Must have been tricky.
Very tricky. One small detail Catmull mentions. Pixar never required employment contracts. People worked there because they wanted to. Disney found that deeply unsettling at first.
Different philosophies.
Totally. But ultimately, the merger worked because there was trust, particularly between the leaders, and a genuine desire on both sides to learn from each other.
What were some initial observations when they started working with Disney Animation?
Catmull noticed things like how sterile the workspaces looked. People had apparently been told to tidy up for a good impression. It was a stark contrast to the incredibly personalized, expressive desks at Pixar.
A sign of a different culture.
And the feedback system was different too. At Disney then, directors got mandatory notes from many different sources. It could be overwhelming, sometimes conflicting, not like the focused Braintrust model.
So they made changes at Disney.
Gradually, yeah. They helped Disney Animation develop its own version of the Braintrust, called the Story Trust. They eliminated the mandatory notes system. They even brought Disney folks over to watch a Pixar Braintrust session, just to see that intense candor in action.
Show, don't just tell.
Exactly. And they pushed the importance of research trips that show your work principle. Get out and see the real world.
There was that story about Ratatouille during the transition too, a resource issue.
Yeah, great example of reinforcing self-reliance. They had a big story change, needed way more people to re-rig the rat characters, 4 legs versus 2 legs. A huge technical shift.
And the production team wanted to borrow animators from Disney.
Right, Disney had people available. Seemed logical. But Catmull and Lasseter said no. They basically forced the Ratatouille team to figure it out with their existing resources.
Tough love.
Kind of, it sent a message. Solve your problems creatively within your team. Don't rely on external bailouts. It reinforces that problem-solving muscle.
And these principles did help revive Disney Animation.
The results speak for themselves, right? The Princess and the Frog, Tangled, Frozen. Applying ideas like empowering directors, trusting the iterative process, emphasizing research, it clearly contributed to a major creative resurgence.
Tangled was a big challenge, adapting that passive character.
Huge challenge. How do you make Rapunzel, famously stuck in a tower, the active protagonist driving her own story? That took a lot of story work, a lot of iteration.
And even small rituals changed, like giving out bonuses.
Yeah, after Tangled's success, they adopted the Pixar practice at Disney Animation of personally thanking every single crew member while handing out bonus checks. A small gesture, but it powerfully reinforces that the film belongs to everyone, acknowledging every contribution.
Thinking about embedding this culture of continuous improvement, Catmull talks about something called Notes Day. What was that about?
Notes Day came about as Pixar got bigger. How do you maintain that early intensity, that playful spirit, that constant self-assessment, while also needing to get leaner and more efficient?
A common challenge for growing companies.
Exactly. So the idea was, let's dedicate an entire day to company-wide self-assessment, the core belief. The people who actually know how to make Pixar better are the employees doing the work every day.
So, tap into the collective intelligence. How did it work logistically?
They had town halls to explain it, set up an electronic suggestion box beforehand so people could submit thoughts anonymously or not. Then they had departmental meetings, kind of a warm-up for Candor and smaller familiar groups.
And then bigger sessions.
Yeah, mixed group sessions where people deliberately sat with colleagues they didn't know well, breaking down silos. And crucially, they separated executives into their own groups.
Why? To encourage free speech.
Precisely. So people would feel completely safe saying what they really thought without worrying about impressing or offending the bosses directly in the room.
Did it work? What came out of it?
It was apparently incredibly productive. They got immediate, practical suggestions they could act on right away. John Lasseter gave this really candid, emotional speech acknowledging specific feedback he'd received about his own leadership style, which showed vulnerability from the top.
That's a powerful tone.
Absolutely. And the range of topics was huge, from super technical pipeline issues to sociological concerns about work-life balance or communication, even people suggesting areas where more drastic budget cuts could happen.
So it wasn't just complaining, it was constructive problem solving.
That was the goal. Notes Day became this institutional mechanism for learning, for adapting, for showing that the company was wanting to wade into the messy, difficult problems together.
We can't really talk about Pixar's history without talking about Steve Jobs, a complex figure in the story.
Absolutely. And Catmull is very candid about it. Acknowledges the genius, the vision, but also describes the early Steve Jobs as often dismissive, lacking empathy, sometimes just plain difficult.
But he evolved.
Catmull argues he really did, significantly, during his time involved with Pixar. He believes Steve's personal life changes, but also the influence of the Pixar culture itself, helped him become fairer, wiser, develop a much deeper sense of partnership.
Which didn't diminish his drive for innovation.
No, if anything, it seemed to solidify it. He became perhaps a more self-aware leader, still demanding excellence, but maybe understanding the human element better.
And he was deeply involved in the Pixar headquarters building design.
Obsessed with it. His initial ideas were apparently kind of weird, like trying to almost force collisions between people in an uncomfortable way.
To force interaction.
Yeah, but the final design became this incredible embodiment of Pixar's collaborative philosophy.
How so? What are the key features?
It's designed around a single main entrance, leading into this huge central atrium. That atrium contains all the common spaces: meeting rooms, mailboxes, restrooms, the main theater, cafes, game areas. Everything that draws people out of their offices.
So you constantly run into people from other departments.
That's the explicit goal. Open staircases, lots of glass, steel. It maximizes cross-traffic, encourages those chance encounters, those informal conversations where ideas can spark. Catmull calls the building Steve's movie. It was this project he poured his vision into, trying to physically shape a space that would foster creativity and connection.
Wow. Okay, what an incredible journey we've just traced. From, the absolute beginnings of computer graphics.
Right, those early university days.
Through the massive struggles to get films like Toy Story made, dealing with that weird emptiness after achieving a huge goal.
That post-Toy Story reflection.
Learning to actively find those hidden problems, developing core principles like story is king, valuing people.
Building mechanisms like the Braintrust for real candor.
Embracing failure not as an end, but as part of learning. Actively protecting new ideas from the beast.
Using things like dailies and research trips to broaden perspectives.
Navigating that huge Disney acquisition. Creating systems like Notes Day for ongoing assessment.
And even seeing how leadership evolves and how culture gets baked into the very architecture of a building. It's a lot.
It really is.
And the key thing to remember is these aren't just, cool stories about animation history. They're fundamental lessons in building and sustaining a creative culture that can actually learn, adapt, and thrive, especially when things get tough or uncertain.
Catmull's point seems to be that the future isn't some fixed destination you arrive at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a direction you're heading. It requires constant vigilance, constant effort, brutal honesty with yourself, a willingness to face problems head-on, and making course corrections all the time.
And it's amazing that these insights came directly from the source material that you, our listener, provided for this deep dive. We really appreciate that.
We do. So maybe a final thought for you to chew on building on all this. Think about uncertainty, unseen problems, adaptation.
Yeah.
How can you in your own work, or maybe even your own life, consciously try to seek out the perspectives you aren't hearing right now? How can you make deliberate space for those fragile, unproven new ideas and shield them, just a little, from the forces that want things to stay the same?
Knowing that wrestling with problems, stepping into that unknown, that's where the real growth happens.
Right. It's uncomfortable, but essential. So what stands out most to you from everything we've unpacked today? What resonates?
Lots to think about. Thank you so much for sharing this incredible source material, and thanks all of you for joining us for the deep dive.
Thanks for listening. Visit our library and subscribe below for more book summaries. This has been a Sprint Reads production.